This is the life story of Sarah Vivian Cummings Carlile. Vivian, as she would be called, was born August 14th in 1896 in Heber, Utah. She was the fourth child of Elisha Jones Cummings, age 34, and Hannah Mary Clegg, age 29. Now, the story that I'm going to relate to you can in no way be verified, but this is a story that was told to me, Darylee, by her grandmother. So Grandma was a twin, and when her mother was expecting, she accidentally tripped on a stake that punctured her stomach. So when the babies were born, one baby was dead, a little girl, and they took this baby outside and put it on the porch while they attended to the grandma's birth. Well, in the meantime, the dogs got onto the porch and took the remains of this deceased baby. Now, horrible experience by the entire family. That's all that I can remember of Grandma's story that she told me. Like I mentioned, Vivian was the fourth and the last child of Elisha and Hannah. Now let me introduce you to the Cummings family. Vivian's oldest brother was Elisha, called Kyle. He was 8 years old when she was born. Her sister, Margaret Lillian, was 6 years old, and her brother, H. Clay or Henry Clay, was 4 years old. She was born into families with very impressive lineage. On her father's side, her great-great-grandfather fought in the Revolutionary War under General Washington, and on her mother's side, she had a grandmother who crossed the plains with the Martin Handcart Company, which was caught in the terrible snowstorm and had to be rescued in 1856. Now, Vivian grew up in a home where her father was very prominent civic leader and sheepman, and it would appear that the family had the means for a very comfortable lifestyle. Her mother was the center of the home and ran the household with a firm hand, requiring the children to have chores. So here's a story in Vivian's own words about a chore that her and Clay had to do for their mother. Quote, "One day Ma sent Clay and me out to rake leaves. We had a tub to put these leaves in to haul away. Now Clay went out and raked on the south side of the house, and I raked on the north side. Clay called to me and said for me to come and help him carry the leaves. I went around the house and I started to lift the tub, but I couldn't. I just couldn't lift that tub. And Clay said, 'Now, Viv, lift it and come on.' I said, 'I can't lift it, it's too heavy.' Clay hollered at me and said, 'You had better help me or I'll call Ma.' I told him again, I just can't lift the tub, and I couldn't. It was just too heavy. And so Clay hollered and said, 'Ma, she won't help me carry these leaves.' Ma came out and told me to get going, and I said, 'I can't lift the tub.' She said, 'Well, you can, and you lift that tub and get those leaves emptied.' I said, 'I can't lift the tub, Ma.' She came to me and slapped me and told me to go in the house. She went to the tub to help Clay, and she couldn't lift it either. Oh, poor Clay. You know those iron pulleys that they used to put hay in to pull up on the barn? Well, we had one. He had put one on my side of the tub with 2 or 3 big rocks and then covered them all over with leaves. And it was all on my side. Well, I couldn't lift it. And then when Ma found out she couldn't lift it up either, she felt real bad and that she had slapped me, and all the matter she was at even poor Clay." Another story that Vivian tells about her and Clay at dinner time. She says, "Clay sat on the west side of the table and I sat on the east, near the front door. Pa sat here and Ma sat there. When we were eating supper, Clay would reach under the table. You know, he wore those really thick-soled shoes, and he would stick his foot over and he would kick me in the shins with those soles. I would think, well, I won't say anything, and I would move my legs back. But he would kick and kick until finally I said, 'Pa, Clay keeps kicking me on the shins and it hurts.' Pa said, 'Now, Clay, you behave yourself.' But he kept it up, kept kicking me under the table and doing it so Ma and Pa couldn't see him. Finally, Pa said, 'Now you two straighten up or I'll send one to the bathroom and one to the pantry and you won't get your supper. Behave now.' But honestly, my shins were bleeding the whole time I was growing up from where he would be kicking me. Oh dear, there were some times I could have just mashed him." Here's a picture with Vivian in it at either a school or a church activity, I would say about 1911. So here's another story that Vivian tells about her childhood. One day the train got in from Salt Lake about 11:30 in the morning. And Mom and Pa had come home on that train and were there when I got there from school to get my lunch. Now Grandma Clegg was staying with us while Ma was gone. Ma took a hat out of a sack and said, "Now Viv, I want you to wear this back to school. It's such a pretty little hat." And I looked at it and I liked it. It was straw with a rim around it. There were blue ribbons around the crown and a big bow in the back with yards of blue ribbon. I thought it was the prettiest little hat. I put it on and I thought I was so cute. Ma straightened it on my head and said, "Now this is so cute and you look so nice, Viv. All the little girls in Salt Lake are wearing these hats. Yes, all of them." So I kept the hat on and started back to school. I got to the door and I thought, I wonder where she got it. I turned to Ma and said, "Where did you get it?" Ma said, "Salt Lake." "I know, but where?" And she said, "The Cresses store." And I thought, Cresses store, well, I won't be wearing that 15-cent hat. So I took it off and put it on the table and was going back out the door, and Ma stopped me and made me come back and put that hat on again. By now I was mad, and I said, "The kids will tease me wearing a hat that comes from the Cresses store." Ma said, "They won't know. You're going to wear that hat to school." Well, when I got to Main Street, I stopped at Grandpa Cummings' home. It was a big home where the library stands now. There was a board bridge crossing the sidewalk, and the water ran under the bridge to water the lawn and the garden. It was just wide enough, and I thought, I'm not going to wear that hat from Cresses. So I took the hat off and bent over the bridge, folding the hat a little, and found a place that would fit just under the bridge without breaking the straw. I pushed that hat under, and I thought I would pick it up on my way home from school, and Ma would never know. I went to school, and after school I came back to get my hat, and down on the sidewalk, all scattered all over everywhere, was that blue ribbon from my hat. Oh my word, the dogs had got that hat and tore it up. The straw and the ribbons were scattered all over the whole block. Clay and his friend Sylvan Rasbin came along and saw the trouble I was in. They followed me home telling me I was going to get the spanking of my life. And they laughed and I cried. I was never so scared in all my life. Ma would have killed me if Pa hadn't have been there. You might get the idea that Ma was mean, but she wasn't mean. She would slap us sometimes, but we usually had it coming. Vivian also talked about her mother's belief in herbs and curing diseases. She tells about having to wear an ossifity bag. An ossifity bag was a common sight during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These were little bags that were purchased at a local pharmacy and stuffed with various pungent herbs to ward off diseases and evil spirits. Here is Vivian's description of the little bag. Ossifidia bags were usually a little white bag made of a piece of dishcloth or something. Ma would put herbs in the bags and hang them around our necks. And smell? You never smelled anything like it in your life. Now, it was supposed to keep diseases away. Ma said it would cure a cold and heal a burn. It could do everything to keep us feeling good. But we didn't believe it. I had every disease that came along, and Clay and Lillian did too. In September of 1915, Vivian went with her father to Kansas City, probably to sell sheep. Then they went on to Chicago to see Clay, who was serving a mission there. On September 19, 1950, they visited the Chicago Garfield Park Conservatory, one of the largest and most stunning botanical conservatories in the nation. Let's hear in her own words about this experience.
I remember when me and Pa went back and we stayed in Kansas City for about 3 days, and then we went on to Chicago by train. And that's when Clay was on his mission. You could go visit a man, but you can't anymore, they don't allow it. So we went and stayed between Chicago, and I remember we got one room for all of us, and Pa and Clay slept in a bed like over in that corner, and I slept in one over here. And I could lay in my bed and watch the elevated railways and trains and streetcars going way up, at least higher, about as high as the top then, that's when in Chicago. And I know Clay took us to an opera called The Whirl of the World. that I oh, it was just good. And so we stayed with him, I believe, I think we took him about 9 days. And when we left him to come home, of course, he and Elder Empty from Idaho, and I forget the other elder's name, and Clay, of course, went to depot with us. And we bid him goodbye. We went in the, sit on our seats and talking to Clay through the window here, and he had his handkerchief out just for crying. All would be crying. Of course, we all got to crying. And I believe that's part of the day. I hate to hear a train whistle. I can't stand to hear a train whistle. We could go.
And here we are back in Heber City on the porch with Lillian and her two daughters, Hannah, Elisha Jones, and Vivian. And here's Vivian with her two nieces, about 1916. Vivian and France lived in the same ward growing up. They probably didn't associate very much during that time because there's 6 years difference between the two of them. But somehow they obviously started to court, fell in love, and ended up marrying in the Salt Lake City Temple. They were married by Joseph Fielding Smith Jr. on September 27th, 1916. I would imagine this picture was taken close to the time that Vivian and Francis was married, about 1916. So in the picture you see to the left, Hiram Moulton and Lillian, Elisha Jones holding the two granddaughters. Then you have H. Clay standing right above his mother Hannah. Then you have Vivian, Kyle, her brother, Francis, and Pearl. But I want you to notice the portrait of Vivian above H. Clay's head. So here's another picture of the Cummings Clan around dinner. Wouldn't it be interesting to find out what kind of conversation they were having? 1919 was a big year. So 3 years after getting married, Vivian and France had their first child, Daryl. A month later in October, they moved into their very first and only home on 314th West, 1st South. Now the home was built in 1904 and first owned by Francis's brother, John W., and his wife, Emma. They paid only $1,600 for this home. Next 8 years, they added 3 more children. Wanda was born in 1922, Nadine was born in 1924, and finally Clay was born in 1927. Vivian's whole world was her family. Vivian loved to go to Salt Lake. She loved having lunch at the bar at Woolworth's. She loved the smell of diesel and would want to follow the big buses just to smell the diesel. She also loved the smell of cigar smoke and would be caught following someone who was smoking a cigar. Another very popular restaurant was the China Doll on 21st South. And France had to stop and get pumpernickel bread before they left Salt Lake. Like was mentioned before, Vivian's whole world was her family. She always wanted the best for them, and as they grew and left to start their own families, I'm sure it was very hard on her. After Daryl got married, for a short time, he and Helen lived in the upstairs apartment. Helen would tell the story about Vivian coming up the stairs, knocking at the door, and handing her one piece of cake. She would say, now this is for Daryl. Helen would always get a kick out of her never offering another piece of cake for her, just one piece of cake, always for Daryl. In 1939, World War II broke out and Daryl enlisted in the Marines. He was then shipped over to Iwo Jima. One night in February 1945, in the middle of the night, Vivian sat straight up in bed and yelled, "Jump, Daryl, jump!" I'm sure a very unnerving dream or nightmare to have. Over a month later, in April, they received a telegram saying that Daryl had been injured from a blast concussion in February and was hospitalized. So was it a dream or was it a vision? Later on, when Daryl returned home, he and his brother were out on the back porch, and Daryl related to Clay that he had actually heard his mother yell, "Jump, Daryl, jump," which probably saved his life. Like mentioned before, family was number one for Vivian, and I'm sure this day was a day of celebration for both Vivian and France as they had all their children together for this priceless family portrait taken in 1949. Sitting on the front row, we have Nadine, France, Vivian, and Wanda, and the back row, Clay and Daryl. Vivian was a great cook. Vivian was always known to feed everyone, even the hitchhikers. Now, of course, the hitchhikers were never allowed to come in the house, but she'd always fix something for them and serve it outside. Oftentimes, she would send Frances out to pick watercresson in the nearby creeks just for those special meals. Her grandchildren remember her fixing a fish dish called Fin and Hattie. She was also very well known for her carrot pudding with either white sauce or rum sauce. And a Valentine tradition for those grandkids would be her homemade marshmallow hearts. Vivian even made and sold butter to help bring in a little extra income for the family. In the 1950s, Frances and Vivian managed the Avon Theater in Heber. Tickets to see a movie was only 15 cents. Losing a child at any age for a parent is unbearable. And so it was for Vivian and Frances when they received the news that Daryl had passed away suddenly on March 8, 1957. Some say that Vivian never got over the death of Daryl, and for a good year after the death, Vivian would insist on going to the cemetery at least once or maybe twice a day, and through the remainder of her days, she visited the graveside often. In September of 1966, Vivian and Frances celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. It was held at the Hawaiian restaurant in Salt Lake City, and it was such a fun night of celebration for the entire family. 2 short years after their 50th wedding anniversary, Frances' health began to decline in the fall of 1968. Now, Frances had struggled with asthma and other health issues for many years, and now worn down by life and age, he passed away on December 4th, 1968. It's hard to see a couple who spent 52 years together now separated. At the funeral, just before they closed the casket, Vivian walked up to the casket, put her hands on his face, and just said, "Oh, France." It seemed so final. After the death of France, her children rallied around her. Clay, who was in Heber, was especially good about helping his mother. Nadine would visit often, and Merrill kept the family laughing as he would tease her and make her so mad, but made everybody else laugh. She would often get into that 1964 Plymouth Fury and drive to Provo to see Wanda and her family. She would say, "Now the people are so nice to me. They honk and wave as they pass me going down the canyon," when in reality they probably were not happy about her speed and were honking to get her out of the way, and the wave probably was not quite a wave. Vivian was a larger woman, but even before Frances' death, she started having issues with her esophagus. She could not get the food down, and because of that, she probably lost over 100 pounds. And for many years, she suffered with gout. She would tie a string around her knee. The bow always had to be over the knee, and she claimed that it always made her feel better. Now, 2 years after Frances' passing, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. She told Clay that when they wheeled her into the operating room, she looked up and could see Daryl holding the door on one side and Frances holding the door on the other side. Vivian would live for 6 more years after her diagnosis. Those of us who remember her think of her sitting in that chair in the front room by the window. In March of 1976, Vivian suffered a stroke. She was hospitalized for a while, but was able to go home one more time for just a few days, only returned to the hospital where she died on March 28, 1976. Now, all of her children had gone to visit her in the hospital, and she was insistent that they leave quickly. They say they probably didn't even make it out of the hospital before she passed away.